50, not 3, not 10, not the handful most of us could name if someone stopped us on the street and asked what Jesus actually told us to do. 50. That's the number, and I want you to sit with it for a moment before we go any further, because the number itself is the first thing that should unsettle you. Most of us carry a version of Christianity in our pockets that has maybe 4 or 5 commands in it. Love God, love your neighbor, don't judge, forgive people, be kind. We've compressed an entire life of teaching down into something that fits on a coffee mug, and then we wonder why our lives don't look transformed. We wonder why the anger still comes up at the same hour every evening. We wonder why the same person's name still makes our jaw tighten after 11 years. We wonder why we pray for peace and receive nothing but the sound of our own heartbeat in a dark room. 50 commands. And the vast majority of us are living by 5. Now, I want to be careful here, because I'm not saying that to shame you. That's not what this is. If shame worked, we'd all have been transformed decades ago. Shame is the most abundant spiritual resource on earth, and the least effective. I'm saying it because there's something genuinely hopeful buried inside that gap. If you've been trying to change and failing, it may not be that you're weak. It may be that you've been given 5 tools for a job that requires 50. You've been trying to rebuild a house with a hammer and no saw, no level, no measuring line, and then blaming your hands. The commands are there. They've been there the whole time. They're scattered across the Gospels. Some of them spoken on a hillside to thousands. Some of them murmured to a single person in a doorway. Some of them delivered so quietly that they've been read past for centuries by people scanning for the famous parts. And when you gather them, when you actually line them up and look at them together, something becomes visible that you cannot see when they're separated. They're not a list of rules. They're a design. They fit together. Each one addresses a specific mechanism inside a human being. The way we think, the way we speak, the way we hold what has been done to us. And that's the shape of what we're doing here today. 50 commands, and I'm going to walk you through every one of them, and I'm going to show you what each one is actually asking of you, because most of them have been softened and blurred and turned into something comfortable, and the comfortable version doesn't work. Here is what I promise you. By the time we reach the end of this, you will not think the same way about your own mind. You will not speak the same way about the people who have hurt you. And you will be holding forgiveness differently in your hands than you are holding it right now. Not because I've talked you into anything, but because you'll have seen the design, and the design is very hard to unsee. That's the whole of it. 50 commands. 3 faculties, thought, speech, and pardon, and a road that runs from where you're sitting right now to somewhere considerably freer. Let's begin. Before we do, one small thing, and I'll keep it short because I don't want to break the quiet we've just built. If these words are reaching you, would you leave a like on this video? It's free. It's one tap. And I want to be honest with you about why I'm asking, because it isn't about numbers on a screen. Every like on a teaching like this is what carries it further out to someone at 3 in the morning who typed something desperate into a search bar and doesn't know yet that anything will answer. Your single tap is what puts these words in front of a person you will never meet, whose name you'll never know, who may be sitting in the exact condition you were in a year ago. That's all it is. A quiet gift handed to a stranger. The thumbs up is just below the video. One tap and it's done. And while you're there, tell me in the comments where in the world you're watching from. City, country, whatever you're willing to share. I'd like you to be able to scroll through and see this thing lighting up. Someone in Manchester, someone in Lagos, someone in a truck stop in Nebraska, someone in Manila who hasn't slept. The same words landing in all of those rooms at the same moment. It's worth seeing now. Command 1. Part 1. The commands that reshape how you think. 1. Repent. This is the first word out of his mouth. Before the miracles, before the parables, before a single person had been healed or fed or raised, The very first public instruction of Jesus' ministry is this one word, and almost everyone misunderstands it. We hear repent, and we picture a man in sackcloth weeping over his sins. We picture guilt. We picture the emotional experience of feeling terrible about what we've done. And that's not wrong exactly, but it's so incomplete that it functionally becomes wrong, because it puts the emphasis on feeling when the word itself is about thinking. The Greek is metanoeo. Meta, change or beyond. Nous, mind. Change your mind. Go beyond the mind you currently have. It is, at its root, not an emotional command at all. It's a cognitive one. Jesus opens his ministry by telling people that the thing standing between them and the kingdom of God is not primarily their behavior. It's their thinking, the architecture of how they perceive reality, which means the first command is the foundation of the other 49. You cannot obey any of the rest of them from inside the mind you currently have. Every command that follows assumes you've done something to the machinery underneath. And here's why that matters practically. Most people who try to change their lives start with behavior. They decide to stop shouting. They decide to be more patient. They decide to forgive their father. And they white-knuckle it for 11 days, and then they collapse, and they conclude they're spiritually defective. But they were never spiritually defective. They were trying to change the output of a system without changing the system. They were trying to get different fruit from the same root. Repent means go underneath the behavior, find the belief that's producing it, and let that belief be dismantled. What belief? That's the work. For some of you, it's the belief that you are fundamentally unlovable and therefore must earn every scrap of affection through performance. And every anxious, over-explaining, apologizing thing you do flows straight out of that. For some of you, it's the belief that if you let your guard down for one moment, you will be destroyed. And every hard, controlling, unforgiving thing you do flows straight out of that. For some of you, it's the belief that God is fundamentally disappointed in you, tolerating you at best. And every hollow, going through the motions prayer flows straight out of that. Those beliefs are not moral failures, they're mostly injuries. They were installed in you by something usually early, usually by people who were carrying their own injuries. But repent says they can be changed. That's the astonishing part. Jesus does not open with feel bad. He opens with your mind can be different than it is. The first word of the gospel is a declaration that human beings are not stuck. Sit with that tonight. Not, what have I done wrong? But, what do I believe that isn't true? That question is the doorway. Everything else we're going to discuss walks through it. 2. Do not worry about your life. He says it plainly, and then he says it again, and then a third time, because he knows we won't accept it the first time. Do not worry about your life, what you will eat or drink, or about your body, what you will wear. Now, every honest person hearing this has the same objection, so let's put it on the table immediately. How do you command an emotion? Worry doesn't feel like a choice. It feels like weather. It arrives. You wake at 4 in the morning and it's already there in the room with you, fully formed, doing its work. And being told not to worry feels roughly as useful as being told not to have brown eyes. So either Jesus is issuing an impossible command, or we're misunderstanding what he's commanding. He's not commanding the feeling, he's commanding the feeding. Look at what he actually does in that passage. He doesn't say, stop feeling anxious. He redirects attention. Look at the birds. Consider the lilies. He takes a mind that is locked in a loop about the future and physically points it somewhere else, at something present, something visible, something that is being sustained without any evidence of strain. He's not arguing you out of anxiety. He's giving your attention a different object. Because worry is not a feeling that happens to you. Worry is a practice. It's a thing you do, repeatedly, usually without noticing, and the doing of it is what sustains it. The initial spike of fear, that's not chosen. That's your nervous system. But the 40 minutes afterward, where you rehearse the conversation, run the scenarios, imagine the worst version and then live inside it in detail, that's not weather, that's labor. You are doing that. And Jesus is saying, stop doing that. This is one of the most practically useful things in the entire Gospels, and it's been sentimentalized into a poster about flowers. Here's the mechanism. Anxiety demands that you resolve the future before you're allowed to be at peace in the present. It says, once you know how this ends, then you can rest. But you will never know how it ends. The future does not hand out its contents in advance, not to anyone, not ever. So anxiety sets a condition for peace that can never, in principle, be met. It's a lock with no key, and you can spend 40 years jiggling the handle. Do not worry, is Jesus telling you the lock is fake? Rest is not on the other side of certainty. It never was. It's available now in the unresolved middle, or it isn't available at all. And then he adds the line that does the real work. Who of you, by worrying, can add a single hour to his life? That's not poetry. That's an audit. He's asking you to examine the return on investment. You have worried. How many hours in your lifetime? Thousands, tens of thousands. Name one thing that worry built. Not one thing that planning built, or preparation, or wise action. Those are different, and he's not against those. Name one thing that the rehearsal of disaster produced. Nothing. It produces nothing. It has never once produced anything. It is the most expensive activity a human being can engage in, and its output, across the whole history of the species, is zero. Tonight, when it comes for you, and it will come, probably around 4, try this. Don't fight it. Fighting it feeds it. Instead, notice the moment it shifts from fear to rehearsal, and at that exact moment, get up and look at something real. The window, a tree, your own hands, anything that exists in the present tense. That is not a trick. That is precisely, mechanically, what Jesus told a hillside full of anxious farmers to do 2,000 years ago. Look at the birds. 3. Seek first the kingdom of God. This one immediately follows the last, and the sequence is not accidental. He tells them not to worry, and then, before they can ask the obvious question, well, what do I do instead? He answers it. Because that's the thing nobody tells you about breaking a mental habit. You cannot remove without replacing. A mind cannot hold a vacuum. Tell someone to stop thinking about the thing, and they will think about nothing else. Every attempt at pure subtraction fails. The only thing that has ever successfully displaced an obsession is a larger obsession. So Jesus doesn't just say stop, he says seek first. And the word first is doing enormous work. He's not saying seek the kingdom only. He's not asking you to abandon your job or stop feeding your children. The passage explicitly says the other things will be added to you. He's talking about order, sequence. What gets the first and best of your attention, and what gets what's left over? Here's the diagnostic, and it's uncomfortable. What is the first thing your mind goes to when you wake? Not what you'd like it to be, what it actually is. Before your eyes are properly open, before you've decided anything, your mind has already gone somewhere. Where? For most of us, it's a problem. Money, usually, or a person, or the thing we said yesterday that we shouldn't have said. That's the first seek. That's what's actually holding the primary position, regardless of what we'd claim on a survey. Now, I want to say something careful here, because this is a place where teaching like this can turn cruel. If you wake with dread every morning, that is not necessarily a spiritual failure. Sometimes that's a body that has been through too much. Sometimes it's grief. Sometimes it's a genuine medical condition that responds to genuine medical treatment, and if that's you, please hear me. Seeking the kingdom and seeing a doctor are not in competition. They never were. Some of the most faithful people I know take medication every morning, and it is not a failure of faith. It's stewardship of a body. But for many of us, the morning dread isn't a condition. It's a habit of attention that has been practiced so long, it now runs automatically. And habits of attention can be retrained, slowly, imperfectly, but genuinely. What does it look like to seek the kingdom first? Not, I think, a rigid morning ritual you'll abandon by February. It looks like asking a different opening question. Instead of what's going to go wrong today, which is what the anxious mind asks before you've given it permission, asking what is God doing today and where might I join it? Same morning, same problems, still there, unsolved, but an entirely different frame around them. And the frame determines what you're able to see. The promise attached is worth noting because it's easy to misread. All these things will be added to you. That is not a guarantee of prosperity. Plenty of people who sought the kingdom first died poor. What he's describing, I think, is something closer to this. When the kingdom holds first position, the other things stop having the power to destroy you. They're still there. You still need them. But they've been demoted from ultimate to important, and that demotion is the difference between a hard life and an unbearable one. 4. Judge not, that you be not judged. Possibly the most quoted and least understood sentence Jesus ever spoke. It gets used in our moment as a conversation ender. Someone raises a moral concern and receives judge not like a door closing. And that's a misuse so complete that it inverts the meaning. Because 3 verses later, Jesus tells the same audience to remove a speck from their brother's eye, which obviously requires having noticed the speck. He's not banning discernment. He couldn't be. He spends a substantial portion of his ministry making extremely sharp moral evaluations about specific people. So what's being forbidden? The Greek word is krino, and in this context, it carries the sense of passing verdict. Sentencing. It's a courtroom word, and the courtroom image is exactly right, because what Jesus is describing is a person who has appointed themselves to a bench they were never given. Here's the distinction that unlocks it. There's a difference between evaluating an action and rendering a verdict on a soul. That was cruel is an evaluation. He is cruel, meaning at his core, permanently that is what he is and what he'll always be, is a verdict. The first is available to you. The second was never yours to issue, because it requires information you categorically do not have. The whole interior life of another person, everything that was done to them, what they were carrying, what it cost them to do, even as badly as they did. You don't have that. Not about anyone. Not about your mother. Not about the person who left. Not about the one who hurt you worst. You have a partial view, filtered through your own injury, and from that partial view, you have been issuing life sentences. And notice the consequence he attaches, that you be not judged. This is often read as a threat from God. Judge others, and God will judge you harshly. But I've come to think it's at least as much a description of a mechanism. The habit of verdict rendering doesn't stay pointed outward. It cannot. A mind that has been trained to reduce people to their worst moment will eventually apply that same procedure to itself, and it will be merciless, because you have more evidence against yourself than against anyone else. You were present for every single thing you ever did. That's why the harshest people you've ever met are, almost without exception, the ones living under the most brutal internal regime. The judgment they aim at the world is the overflow of what they're already receiving at home. They're not cruel because they're strong. They're cruel because the machine is running and it can't be pointed anywhere safe. So the command has an immediate self-interested benefit. Dismantle the courtroom, and you don't just release other people. You release yourself from being tried every night by a prosecutor who never sleeps and never runs out of material. Try this, practically. The next time you catch yourself moving from evaluation to verdict, from that was wrong to he is worthless, stop at the sentence and ask one question. What don't I know? Not to excuse anything, just to reintroduce the fact of your own ignorance into a process that has been proceeding as if you were omniscient. It's astonishing how much air that one question lets into a closed room. 5. First, take the plank out of your own eye. This is the verse immediately after, and the two are one instruction split in half. The image is deliberately absurd. A man with a construction beam protruding from his eye socket, leaning in close to help someone with a splinter. It's comedy, genuine physical comedy, and I think we lose something by reading it solemnly. Jesus is making people laugh here, and the laughter is the delivery system for something that would be unbearable delivered straight. Because what he's describing is the single most common and least detectable failure mode of the religious mind. The person who is acutely perceptive about everyone else's condition and completely blind about their own. And the reason it's undetectable from the inside is that the perceptiveness is real. That's the trap. The plank-eyed man isn't wrong about the splinter. He sees it. His vision is genuinely good in one direction, which is precisely why he trusts an instrument that is catastrophically miscalibrated. You know this person. There's a decent chance you've been this person. I've been this person. The one who can tell you exactly what's wrong with the family, exactly which relative is the source of the dysfunction, exactly what the church leadership doesn't understand, and who has never once in 20 years said, "I think I may be part of what's making this hard." Now the sequence matters enormously here. He doesn't say never remove the speck. He says first remove the plank, then you will see clearly to remove the speck from your brother's eye. The helping is still on the table. It's still the goal. He's not telling you to abandon people to their splinters. He's telling you the order of operations. And he's telling you that skipping the first step doesn't just make you a hypocrite, it makes you ineffective. You literally cannot do the fine work of helping someone else while your own vision is obstructed. You'll misjudge distance. You'll go for the eye and hit the cheek, which reframes self-examination entirely. It's not a morbid exercise in self-flagellation, not spiritual navel-gazing while the world burns. It's calibration. It's what you do to the instrument before you use it on something delicate. And here's what it looks like in practice, in the actual relationships you're in. Before the conversation with your son, before the message to your sister, before the confrontation, you've been rehearsing for 3 weeks, and you have been rehearsing it. You've got the whole thing scripted. You know exactly what you'll say when they say the thing they always say. Before all that, 1 honest hour with yourself. What is my part? What am I contributing? What am I defending that isn't worth defending? What do I want out of this that I haven't admitted I want? That last one is the plank most of the time. We go into these conversations claiming we want resolution, when what we actually want is to be declared right. And the other person can feel the difference immediately, before you finished your first sentence. And that's why the conversation goes the way it always goes. Take the plank out, then you'll see, and you may find the conversation you were going to have isn't the one that needed having at all. 6. Do not store up for yourselves treasures on earth. We need to be careful with this one, because it's been flattened in 2 opposite directions, and both flattenings are useless. Flattening 1, it's a command against wealth, full stop, and any financially comfortable Christian is living in contradiction. Flattening 2, it's purely metaphorical about the attitude of the heart, and therefore makes no actual claim on your bank account or your calendar. The first produces guilt without change. The second produces change without change. What he actually says is more precise than either. Where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. Read that carefully, because the causation runs backward from how we usually assume. We think my heart loves something, therefore I invest in it. He says, I invest in something, therefore my heart follows. The treasure goes first. The heart comes after. That's a claim about human psychology, and it happens to be observably true. You do not become attached to something and then invest. You invest and then become attached. Ask anyone who's put money into a business they had no feelings about and found themselves lying awake over it 8 months later. Ask anyone who's poured 6 years into a relationship they weren't sure about at the start. The investment generates the affection. Where you put your resources is where your love will eventually go, whether you approved that transfer or not, which makes this command something quite different from a rule about money. It's a warning about how you are being shaped without noticing. Every hour, every pound, every unit of attention you spend is a vote for what your heart will care about in 5 years. And the votes are being counted whether or not you're paying attention to what you're casting. So the question isn't really, how much do I have? It's what am I accumulating toward? And is that where I want my heart to end up? Look at the last 3 months. Not what you intended, what actually happened. Where did the money go and where did the hours go? And I mean the discretionary hours, the ones that weren't spoken for by work and sleep and obligation. Those are your votes. That's the ballot. And whatever won that election is where your heart will be living in 5 years, regardless of what you'd say if someone asked you what you value. For most of us, this is quietly devastating, because we discover we've been voting for something we never consciously chose. The scroll, the comparison, the grievance we keep polishing. Nobody wakes up and decides to build a heart around resentment, but resentment is remarkably good at collecting small daily deposits, and it compounds like anything else. The alternative he offers, store up treasures in heaven, is not a suggestion to think about the afterlife more often. It's an instruction to invest in the category of things that don't decay. People, character, the kind of love that gets given away and can't be lost because it was never held. Those are the only assets that survive the moth and the rust and the thief, and notably, the only ones that survive you. 7. No one can serve 2 masters. He follows immediately with this, and again the sequence is the argument. No one can serve 2 masters. Either you will hate the one and love the other, or you will be devoted to the one and despise the other. The word we need is serve, douleuo, the verb for the work of a slave, not an employee. That distinction is everything. You can absolutely have 2 employers. Millions of people do. But a slave in that world had 1 owner and belonged to him totally. There was no arrangement in which you were owned by 2 people, because ownership is not the kind of thing that divides. So the claim isn't, it's difficult to have divided loyalties. The claim is that divided ultimate loyalty is a category error. It's not hard, it's impossible. And what feels like successfully serving 2 masters is always on inspection, 1 master being served and 1 being managed with the leftovers. And most of us are extremely skilled at not looking closely at which is which. Here's the test he seems to be pointing at, and it's more useful than any inventory of what you own. At the point of collision, what wins? When the thing God is asking of you and the thing money is asking of you point in different directions, which way do you actually turn? Not what you say, what you do. On a Tuesday, when nobody's watching and there's no sermon in it. Because the 2 masters don't conflict most of the time. That's what makes this so hard to see. 90% of life, you can serve both without noticing any tension at all. It's only at the collision points that the real ownership becomes visible. The job that would require you to become someone you don't want to be. The opportunity that only works if you're willing to be dishonest in a small way that nobody would ever catch. The situation where doing right will cost you tangibly and doing wrong will cost you nothing but a vague unease you know from experience will fade in about 6 days. Those moments aren't tests in the sense of God grading you. They're revelations. They show you what was already true. The ownership was already settled long before the moment arrived. The moment just made it legible. And there's something merciful hidden in the harshness of this one. Jesus is not asking you to serve two masters better. He's telling you that the exhaustion you feel is not a failure of effort. It's the natural result of attempting something structurally impossible. If you have been tired for years in a way sleep doesn't touch, this may be why. You have been trying to satisfy two owners who want different things from the same finite life, and you have been blaming yourself for not being able to do it. You can't do it. Nobody can do it. That's not your weakness. That's the design of reality. And the relief on the other side of accepting it is considerable. 8. Ask, and it will be given to you. Ask, and it will be given. Seek, and you will find. Knock, and the door will be opened. 3 verbs, escalating, and we have to handle this one honestly because it's one of the places where naive teaching does the most damage. There are people watching this who asked with everything they had for years, for someone they loved to be healed, and the person died anyway. If we skip past that to talk about the abundance of God, we've betrayed those people, and I won't do it. So let's start there. The command is ask, the command is not, and you will receive precisely the thing you named. And the difference between those two is where most people's faith either matures or collapses. Notice what the verbs actually describe. Ask, seek, knock. Those are all postures of not having. They're the vocabulary of dependence. You do not ask for what's already in your hand. You do not seek what's in your pocket. You do not knock on a door that's standing open. Every one of these verbs presumes a gap between where you are and what you need, and the command is not to close the gap by your own effort, but to stand in it and speak. That's the actual instruction, sustained, undefended asking. And it's much harder than it sounds because everything in us wants to stop. Some of us stop because it feels humiliating. Asking means admitting we can't. Many of you were raised in families where need was treated as weakness, where the child who asked for help learned quickly not to, and you have carried that into your prayer life without ever noticing you did. You pray informationally. You update God on your situation. But you don't ask, not really, not in the raw way a child asks, because somewhere along the line asking became dangerous. Others of us stop because we asked, and it didn't come, and asking again feels like walking back into a room where we were humiliated once already. And I don't have a tidy answer for that second group. I don't think there is one. What I notice is that the verbs are all continuous in the Greek. Keep asking, keep seeking, keep knocking. It's not a single transaction. It's a posture maintained over time, which suggests Jesus fully expects there to be a duration in which nothing appears to be happening. He builds the delay into the command. If asking always worked immediately, keep knocking would be strange advice. And then he gives the reason, which is the actual heart of it. If you, being evil, know how to give good gifts to your children, how much more will your Father in heaven give good things to those who ask him? The argument is not that you'll get what you name. The argument is about the character of the one being asked. A good father does not always give what the child requests. Sometimes what the child requests would harm them. Sometimes the timing is wrong. Sometimes the child is asking for a smaller thing than what's actually being prepared. But a good father is never indifferent to being asked. That's what's being commanded, not a technique for extraction. A relationship in which need is spoken rather than swallowed. If you have stopped asking, and some of you stopped years ago and have been performing prayer ever since, this is the invitation back. Not to pretend the disappointment didn't happen, to bring the disappointment itself as the thing you're asking about. 9. Enter through the narrow gate. Wide is the gate, and broad is the road that leads to destruction, and many enter through it. But small is the gate, and narrow the road that leads to life, and only a few find it. This one has been weaponized, and I want to disarm it before we look at it. Because in a lot of hands, narrow gate has meant our group is small and correct, and everyone else is going to hell, which turns the verse into a permission slip for exactly the judgment we dealt with 4 commands ago. That reading also makes the narrowness a matter of doctrinal position, of being on the right side of an argument, when the context is nothing of the sort. This sits at the end of the Sermon on the Mount, after an extended teaching about anger, lust, honesty, generosity, forgiveness, and worry. The narrow road he's just described is not a set of correct opinions. It's a way of living that is genuinely practically hard. Here's what makes it narrow. It's narrow because it requires you to do the thing that costs you something in the moment, with no visible return. The broad road isn't the road of obvious wickedness. Very few people wake up and choose evil. The broad road is the road of the reasonable. It's the road where you keep the resentment, because honestly, look at what they did. Where you tell the version of the story that makes you look better, because it's basically true, and the full version is complicated. Where you spend the money on yourself, because you earned it and you did earn it. Where you don't make the phone call because they should call you first, and they should. Every one of those is defensible. That's what makes the road broad. There's room for everyone on it because nobody has to justify anything. It's the path of least resistance dressed up as fairness. The narrow road is narrow because at every one of those junctions, it asks you to do the more expensive thing. Forgive when you have a legitimate case. Tell the truth when the lie is small and would cost no one. Give when you could reasonably keep. Call first when it's their turn. And notice, none of those are dramatic. This is not about martyrdom. It's about 1,000 small choices in which the narrow option is available and slightly harder, and no one will ever know which you chose. That's why few find it. Not because God has restricted access, but because the gate is small enough that you have to be paying attention to see it. And you can walk past it your entire life while considering yourself a good person and be entirely sincere in that assessment. The word for find there is worth sitting with. Few find it. Finding implies looking. The gate doesn't announce itself. It's not signposted. It appears as an ordinary moment on an ordinary Tuesday, where you could do the generous thing or the fair thing, and both are permitted, and one of them is the gate. Most of them are that small. That's the whole secret. People are waiting for the great test and walking past 40 gates a week. 10. Build your house on the rock. The Sermon on the Mount ends here, and the placement tells you how to read everything before it. 2 builders, 2 houses, 1 storm. The houses look identical until the weather comes. That's the part people skip. In fair conditions, there is no observable difference. Same walls, same roof, same view from the window. You could not tell them apart on a clear day, and neither could the builders. The difference is entirely in what's underneath, invisible, and it becomes relevant exactly once. And notice how he defines the foundation. Everyone who hears these words of mine and puts them into practice. Not everyone who hears them, not everyone who agrees with them, or is moved by them, or shares them, or can quote them. Hearing plus practice. The foolish builder in the story also heard. He was in the audience. He was presumably nodding. That's an uncomfortable thing to say at the end of a teaching like this one, and I'm aware of the irony of saying it partway through a very long video. But it's the thing that has to be said, because there is a particular kind of spiritual consumption that feels exactly like transformation and produces nothing. You listen to teaching. You feel deeply moved. The feeling of being moved registers internally as progress, and you mistake the emotional experience of hearing truth for the structural work of building on it. That's sand, sincere, tearful, genuinely felt sand. The distinction is practice, which is unglamorous and slow and mostly invisible. Nobody sees a foundation, Foundations are, by definition, the part of the building that is buried and unadmired, and the entire reward for building one properly is deferred to a moment of crisis that may be years away, which is exactly why people don't. The rock costs more, takes longer, and yields nothing you can show anyone until the day it saves your life. So here's what I'd ask, and it's the only thing I'll ask about this first section of 10. Not which of these 10 commands moved you. That's the wrong question, and it produces sand. The question is, which one of these 10 are you going to practice this week? 1. Not 10. Pick the one that made you most uncomfortable. That discomfort is usually the location of the actual work. And do something with it before Sunday, because we have 40 more to go, and if the first 10 don't touch the ground, the next 40 won't either. Let's keep going. 11. Do not swear at all. Let your yes be yes. Again, you have heard that it was said, do not break your oath, but I tell you, do not swear at all. Let your yes be yes, and your no, no. On the surface, this looks like the most culturally distant command in the set. Oath swearing isn't a live issue for most of us. Nobody's swearing by Jerusalem or by their own head in the office on Monday. So the instinct is to file it under historical and move on. Don't. Because what's underneath it is one of the most relevant things Jesus ever said about how we speak, and we do the thing he's forbidding constantly. We just do it with different vocabulary. Here's the logic. Why does anyone swear an oath? Because ordinary speech isn't trusted. An oath is an escalation. It exists to mark this statement as more reliable than my normal statements. And the moment you have a category of speech that's extra true, you have automatically created a category of speech that is ordinary true, which everyone correctly understands to mean less binding. That's the trap. The oath doesn't strengthen the important statements. It weakens everything else by comparison. You cannot elevate part of your speech without demoting the rest. And we do this ceaselessly. I swear to God, I'm being completely honest with you. No, seriously, I mean it this time. Trust me, every one of those is a miniature oath, and every one of them is an admission, usually unconscious, that your unmarked speech doesn't carry full weight. Nobody says, I'm being completely honest with you, unless there exists, somewhere in the relationship, a suspicion that sometimes they aren't. So the command is startlingly high. Eliminate the tears. Have one grade of speech, and let it be true. Let your yes be yes. Meaning, let a simple, unadorned yes from you be as reliable as anything you could possibly swear on, so that intensifiers become unnecessary and eventually absurd. Think about what it would mean to be a person like that. Someone whose casual, offhand, no eye contact yes was as good as a signed contract. It's rarer than you'd think. Most of us have a whole gradient. The yes we mean, the yes that means probably, the yes that means I don't want to have this conversation, and the yes that means no, but I'll deal with that later. And everyone around us has learned to read the gradient. Your family knows which yes they're getting. They've known for years, and the deep freedom in this, which is easy to miss. If your yes is genuinely yes, you become able to say no. Those are the same command. Most of the compromised yeses in your life are actually failures of no. You said yes because no was too costly in that moment, and now you're carrying an obligation you never wanted, and the resentment that follows it, and the eventual half-effort that damages the relationship anyway. Let your no be no. It's a kindness to everyone involved, including the person who hears it, who deserves accurate information rather than a yes that will quietly rot. Start here. For 1 week, remove the intensifiers. No, I swear. No, honestly. No, to be completely truthful with you. Just say the thing. You'll notice immediately how often you reach for them, and the reaching itself will tell you something about where your speech has become untrustworthy to you. 12. Let your light shine before others. You are the light of the world. A town built on a hill cannot be hidden. Let your light shine before others, that they may see your good deeds and glorify your Father in heaven. And now, hold that against something he says, one chapter later. Be careful not to practice your righteousness in front of others, to be seen by them. These look like direct contradictions, and a lot of people have quietly resolved the tension by simply forgetting one of them. Usually the second. It's easier to be visibly good than invisibly good, but they're not contradictory, and the resolution is in the last 5 words of the first one, that they may see your good deeds and glorify your Father in heaven. The visibility is commanded. The visibility is not the problem. The question is entirely about where the glory lands. Same action, same public. 2 completely different spiritual events, depending on where the arrow points. And you know which one you're doing. That's the thing. You always know, though you can get very skilled at not asking. Here's the diagnostic that cuts through it fastest. Would you still do it if it were anonymous? If the generosity could never be traced to you, if the kindness was never mentioned, if someone else got the credit publicly, and you had to stand there and watch it happen and say nothing? That last one is the real test. Not whether you can do good in secret. Plenty of people can manage that with a warm, private glow. Whether you can do good and then watch someone else receive the appreciation for it. The reaction in your chest at that moment is diagnostic, and it doesn't lie. But I want to make sure the emphasis lands where he put it, because it's easy to turn this into a paralysis where you never do anything visible for fear of impure motives. That's not the command either. The command is shine. It's active. A lamp under a bowl is called a waste. The failure mode he actually names is hiddenness, not visibility. And there's something in the image worth noticing. A town built on a hill cannot be hidden. Not, should not, cannot. If the light is real, the concealment problem takes care of itself. You don't have to manufacture visibility. A life actually lived this way becomes visible without any promotional effort, because that kind of life is rare enough to be conspicuous, which means the work isn't in the shining, it's in the being. Get the fire right, and the light handles itself. 13. Be reconciled to your brother. If you are offering your gift at the altar, and there remember that your brother has something against you, leave your gift there. First go and be reconciled to them. Then come and offer your gift. I want you to feel how radical the staging is here. A man has traveled to Jerusalem. He's brought an animal. He's waited in line. He is standing at the altar, hands on the offering, at the single most sacred moment available to a person in that entire religious system. And Jesus says, walk away. Leave it there. Go find the person. Come back later. Worship gets interrupted for reconciliation. Vertical is suspended for horizontal. That's an astonishing statement of priority, and it hasn't lost any of its force. Now look at the direction of the obligation, because this is the part that stings. It doesn't say if you have something against your brother. It says if your brother has something against you, the grievance is theirs. You're not the wounded party in this scenario. You're the accused, and you're the one commanded to move. That inverts everything we normally do. Our whole instinct is to wait. When they're ready to talk, when they apologize for their part, when they acknowledge what they did. And underneath that waiting is usually a fairly precise accounting of who owes what, maintained with great care over long periods. Jesus dissolves the accounting entirely. He doesn't ask whether the grievance is fair. Notice that. He doesn't say, if your brother has a legitimate complaint. Your brother has something against you, accurate or not, proportionate or not, and that unresolved something is significant enough to interrupt worship. And then, crucially, he doesn't promise it will work. The command is go and be reconciled, but reconciliation takes 2, and Jesus never suggests the other person will receive you. What's commanded is the going. The outcome isn't yours to control, and elsewhere Paul makes this explicit, as far as it depends on you. That qualifier is mercy for anyone who has gone and been turned away. You did the commanded thing. The rest was never in your jurisdiction. Here's what I'd sit with. There's someone who has something against you. You know their name. It arrived while I was speaking, which is how these things work. Maybe you think they're wrong. Maybe they are wrong. You've built a fairly good case over the years, and you could present it well. The command doesn't care about your case. It says, leave the gift, go. And I'd add gently one thing about timing. He says first, not eventually, not when it feels natural, not when you've processed it sufficiently. There's an urgency in this command that we consistently sand down. We treat reconciliation as something that will happen once conditions improve. Conditions don't improve on their own. Distance calcifies. The thing that would have taken a difficult hour in year 1 takes a decade in year 11, and some of you know exactly what I mean because you're in year 11 right now. 14. Whoever wants to be first must be last. He says it more than once, in more than one setting, which is usually a sign that the disciples weren't taking it in, and they weren't, because the passage right before it is them arguing about rank. That's the setting. 12 men following someone who has told them repeatedly that he's going to be executed, and they're negotiating seating arrangements. It's absurd, and it's also completely recognizable, because status jockeying is one of the most durable human behaviors, and it survives contact with almost anything, including the immediate presence of God. Whoever wants to be first must be last of all and servant of all. Here's what makes this genuinely difficult rather than merely humbling. It's not a command to stop wanting to be first. Read it again. He doesn't rebuke the ambition. He redirects it. Whoever wants to be first, fine. The desire is granted a hearing. Must be last. He's not eliminating the drive. He's telling you the route to what you actually want runs in the opposite direction from where you're pointed. And this creates an immediate problem that anyone honest will hit within about a week. You can't serve your way to greatness in order to become great. The moment lastness becomes a strategy for firstness, it isn't lastness anymore. It's a positioning move with extra steps, and everyone can smell it. We've all met the aggressively humble person, the one whose service has a slightly demanding quality to it, who serves in a way that somehow generates an obligation. So the command has a built-in trap, and I don't think that's accidental. You cannot fake your way through this one, because the faking is visible from the outside almost immediately, and, here's the harder part, is usually invisible from the inside for years. What breaks the trap, I think, is the specific content of the word servant, diakonos. It's a menial word, table waiting, not leadership with a servant heart, which is the version we've made comfortable, actual, low status, uncredited work. And uncredited work is the solvent, because it's the one thing status hunger cannot metabolize. You cannot build a reputation out of things nobody knows you did. So the practical test is simple and unpleasant. What do you do that no one will ever find out about? Not what you do if asked. What you actually did last month that will never appear in any account of your life. If the honest answer is nothing much, and for most of us it is, that's not condemnation. It's just information. It tells you the direction of travel. Start small enough that it doesn't feel like a project. The thing you notice needs doing that isn't yours to do. Do it, and then, harder, don't mention it. Not once. Not even in the passing way that sounds like it isn't mentioning. That last part is where most of us discover how much of our service was purchase. 15. Love your enemies. We arrive at it. The command that everyone knows, that virtually no one practices, and that Jesus seems to regard as the actual centerpiece of the whole thing. You have heard that it was said, love your neighbor and hate your enemy. But I tell you, love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you. I want to slow down here because the standard treatment of this command does something dishonest. It softens enemy into difficult person. It turns this into a teaching about being patient with irritating colleagues, and that's a category error that lets everyone off the hook, because if the command is about mild annoyance, then most of us are basically compliant. Ektros doesn't mean irritating. It means the one who is actively against you, the one who did the thing. And the verse pairs it with those who persecute you. This is not conflict-averse, hypothetical language. Jesus is speaking to an occupied people about an occupying force. There were soldiers in the audience's country who had done real things to real families. That's the referent. So let's not soften it. Think of the actual person, not the one who annoys you, the one who cost you something you cannot get back. Now, what is being commanded exactly? Because if it's an emotion, this command is either impossible or cruel. You cannot generate warmth towards someone who destroyed your family by deciding to. That's not how affection works, and any teaching that implies otherwise has just added a second injury on top of the first. Now you've been harmed and you're failing at Christianity. It isn't an emotion. Agape is not a feeling word. It's a word for a determined orientation toward another's good, a stance, not a sensation. And the proof that Jesus means this is the second half of the verse, which is where the actual instruction lives. Pray for those who persecute you. That's the mechanism. That's the practical, executable thing. Not feel warmly toward them. Pray for them. And that you can do right now, today, while still feeling everything you currently feel. And I want to tell you what happens when you do it, because it's not what people expect. It doesn't make you feel better about them. Not at first, and often not for a long time. What it does, slowly over months, is it changes the category they occupy in your mind, because it is extremely difficult to hold someone in the position of pure enemy while asking God to bless them. The two operations interfere with each other. Prayer requires you to think of them as a person with a life, with fears, with a soul that could be well or unwell. And that's precisely the information that hatred requires you to suppress. Hatred can only survive on a flattened image. The moment they become three-dimensional again, hatred loses its footing. So praying for your enemy is not primarily a gift to your enemy. They may never know. It probably won't change them at all. It's the surgical procedure by which you get your own mind back, because the person who wronged you took something from you once. And unforgiveness is the arrangement by which they continue taking it every day for the rest of your life, at no further cost to them. And then the reason he gives, that you may be children of your Father in heaven. He causes his sun to rise on the evil and the good. The argument isn't that your enemy deserves it. The argument is about family resemblance. This is what God is like, indiscriminate, sun on everyone, rain on the just and unjust. And the command to love enemies is a command to look like your Father. If there's one command in these 50 that changes a life, it's this one. Not because it's the most beautiful, because it's the most expensive, and it goes to the exact place where most of us have been bleeding quietly for years. 16. Turn the other cheek. This sits right beside the last one, and it may be the most misused sentence in the New Testament, used historically to tell abused people to stay, to tell oppressed people to accept it, to convert genuine violence into a spiritual opportunity for the victim. So before anything else, if you are in danger, leave. If someone is hurting you, get out and get help. Nothing in this teaching requires you to remain in reach of someone who is harming you, and anyone who has told you otherwise has handled this text badly and possibly wickedly. Please hear that clearly before we go on. Now, what's actually happening in the passage, and the detail that unlocks it, is one most translations preserve, but nobody notices. If anyone strikes you on the right cheek, turn to him the other also. The right cheek. In a culture where the left hand was not used for social contact, striking someone's right cheek requires a backhand. And a backhand in that world was not how you fought someone. It was how a superior corrected an inferior, master to slave, Roman to Jew, patron to client. It was not an assault so much as a statement of rank. It was an insult delivered physically. So what does turning the other cheek do? It presents the left cheek, which can only be struck with the fist or the open palm, which is how you strike an equal. The gesture forces the aggressor into an impossible position. To continue, he must hit you in a way that concedes your standing as a peer. It isn't submission. It's a form of resistance so subtle it's been read as passivity for 2,000 years. The person who turns the other cheek is not saying, "Do it again." They're saying, "You cannot diminish me, and if you continue, you will have to acknowledge what I am." That changes what this command asks of you. It's not accept degradation, it's refuse to accept the definition of yourself that the degradation is trying to impose, and refuse to answer it in its own language. Because that's the real trap of being wronged. Retaliation looks like the only alternative to submission. Either you hit back or you accept your reduction. And Jesus is proposing a third thing, which almost nobody thinks of in the moment, which is to stand there fully upright and refuse both options. Practically in your actual life, the colleague who talks down to you in meetings, the relative whose comments are always technically deniable, the person who has established a dynamic in which you're small. Turning the other cheek isn't taking it, it's declining the frame. It's the calm, unrattled response that neither escalates nor accepts, and it is far more unsettling to the person doing it than anger would be, because anger confirms that the diminishment landed. The composure is the resistance. 17. Go with him 2 miles. Same passage, same logic, and this one has an even sharper edge once you know the setting. If anyone forces you to go 1 mile, go with him 2. Roman soldiers had the legal right to compel a civilian in occupied territory to carry their pack. 1 mile. That's the limit, and it was a real limit in Roman military regulation, because compelling more than that created problems. A soldier who abused the privilege could face discipline. The mile was both a right and a boundary. So picture it. You're on a road. A soldier from the army occupying your country hands you 60 pounds of equipment. You have no choice. You carry it a mile, seething, counting steps, and at the marker you set it down, and he takes it back, and that's the transaction. Your humiliation, precisely measured and legally bounded. Jesus says, at the marker, keep walking. And now the soldier has a problem. Because the 2nd mile isn't his right, it's your gift, and it puts him in a position of potential trouble. Suddenly the man with all the power is the one saying, "Please give me the pack back." The entire dynamic has inverted, and no violence occurred, and no law was broken. What's the principle? The compelled act is transformed the moment it becomes a chosen act. Mile 1, you are a victim. Mile 2, you are an agent. Nothing external has changed. Same road, same pack, same weight on the same shoulders. But something decisive has changed in who you are while carrying it. And I think this is one of the most useful things in the entire Gospels for people in genuinely constrained lives. Because most people are carrying something they didn't choose. The care of a parent who is disappearing, a job you cannot leave for 4 more years, a body that doesn't work the way it did, an obligation that arrived without your consent and won't be leaving. You cannot always put the pack down. That's not always available, and I won't pretend it is. But there's a place somewhere inside the carrying where you can stop counting steps to the marker and start choosing the road. Same pack, same mile, utterly different life. That's not resignation. Resignation is, I have no choice. This is, I have chosen this. And those two produce entirely different human beings, even when the external circumstances are identical to the inch. 18. Give to the one who asks you. Give to the one who asks you, and do not turn away from the one who wants to borrow from you. Here's where the honest objection arrives immediately, and it deserves a real answer rather than a spiritual deflection. What about the person who will misuse it? What about the one who's asked 11 times? What about enabling? Those are real questions. But notice what happens when we lead with them. They become the frame, and the command becomes an exception-hunting exercise. We spend all our energy establishing the boundaries of when we don't have to give, and by the time we've finished the careful ethical work, the moment has passed and nothing was given, and we feel we've handled it responsibly. I think the command is deliberately stated without qualification precisely because our instinct for qualification is so strong. He's not unaware that some requests are unwise. He's placing the default somewhere other than where we naturally place it. Our default is closed with exceptions for the deserving. He's proposing open with exceptions for the genuinely harmful. That's a much smaller change than it sounds, and a much bigger one than it sounds, both at once. And there's a question underneath this that's more revealing than the ethics. What is it that actually makes us hesitate? Usually not concern for the person's welfare, if we're honest. Usually it's the sense that giving to someone who hasn't earned it is unfair. That there should be a relationship between merit and receiving, and giving to the undeserving damages something. But that instinct, followed all the way down, is the exact thing that makes grace incomprehensible to us. If receiving must be earned, then everything you've received from God is either earned, which would be a strange claim, or a violation of an order you believe in. You can't hold both. The reflex that says he doesn't deserve this is the same reflex that will not let you rest in your own unearned standing. So this command is training. It's not primarily an economic policy. It's the repeated practice of giving where merit is absent, until the concept stops feeling like a violation, until you can receive on the same terms you've learned to give. And practically, I'd rather be wrong occasionally in the direction of generosity than reliably right in the direction of withholding. The first error costs money, the second one costs something else. 19. Do not let your left hand know what your right hand is doing. When you give to the needy, do not announce it with trumpets. Do not let your left hand know what your right hand is doing, so that your giving may be in secret. The trumpet image is satirical. It's very unlikely anyone was literally sounding a horn before donating. He's ridiculing something, and ridicule is a strong signal about how seriously he takes it. But the deeper part is the left hand and right hand, which is not about other people at all. Other people were covered by "don't announce it." The hands are you, your own two hands. He's describing a secrecy so complete that part of you doesn't know what another part is doing. That's a claim about the internal audience, because the harder problem isn't hiding your generosity from the public. Most of us can manage that. The harder problem is hiding it from yourself, not keeping the internal ledger, not filing it under evidence, not retrieving it at 2 a.m. when you need to feel like a decent person, not deploying it in an argument 3 years later. We all keep the ledger. There's a running total in most of us of what we've given and what it demonstrates about our character, and the total is consulted more often than we'd admit. Don't let your left hand know. Do it. And let it go. Don't file it. Why does this matter so much? Because a recorded gift is not fully given. If I gave you something and kept a receipt I intend to produce later, part of that transaction is still mine. I'm holding a claim, and the person who received it can often feel the claim, even years on, even unspoken. There's a particular weight to gifts from people who remember. The reward he names is your Father, who sees in secret, will reward you, which I've come to read less as payment and more as description. Something happens to the person who gives without recording. They become lighter. They stop needing the recognition, which means they stop being controlled by whether it comes. That's not a prize handed out later. That's the immediate consequence of releasing the receipt. Here's the practice. And it's harder than it sounds. Give something this week and then forget it on purpose. When your mind retrieves it, and it will probably within a day, put it down again. repeatedly if necessary. That's the whole discipline, not the giving, the putting down. 20. When you pray, go into your room and shut the door. But when you pray, go into your room, close the door and pray to your Father who is unseen. Same principle as the last one, applied to prayer, but there's something additional here worth drawing out, because this command has a gift in it that most people never unwrap. The public prayer problem is obvious. He names it directly, the ones who pray to be seen. And we all know the phenomenon, the subtle shift in vocabulary and cadence when someone prays out loud, the way the prayer becomes a communication with the room disguised as a communication with God. But the room and the closed door are doing something more than preventing hypocrisy. They're creating a space where you can be honest. Because here's what I've noticed about prayer. Most of us pray as though we're being overheard, even alone. There's an internal editor running, keeping the language acceptable, filtering out the parts that seem inappropriate to say to God. So we pray a curated version, the grief without the anger, the request without the desperation, the confession without the part we're actually ashamed of. The closed door is permission to stop curating. And the phrase "your Father, who is unseen," is doing work there too, unseen, meaning you also cannot see him, which is precisely the difficulty of prayer, and he names it rather than pretending otherwise. But also, this is a father, and the language of the passage is intimate, not the judge, not the assessor, the one you can go into a room with and close the door. If your prayer life is dead, and for a lot of people listening it is, it's a performance you conduct out of duty, and it produces nothing. This might be the reason. You've been praying to an audience. Maybe an imagined congregation, maybe a version of God who is primarily evaluating the quality of your prayer. Shut the door. Say the actual thing. The rage, if it's rage. The doubt, if it's doubt. The request you're embarrassed to want, whatever's been edited out for years, he already knows it. That's stated a few verses later. Your Father knows what you need before you ask him. Which raises the obvious question of why ask at all. And here's the answer I've landed on. The asking isn't for his information, it's for your honesty. Prayer is the place where you stop performing, and if you never say the true thing out loud to God, there may be nowhere else in your life where you say it at all. 21. When you fast, wash your face. When you fast, put oil on your head and wash your face, so that it will not be obvious to others that you are fasting. 3 commands in a row now with the same architecture, giving, praying, fasting, and each one built the same way. When you do this, hide it. Jesus assumes all 3 are happening. He doesn't say if you fast, he says when. The practice is presumed, only the visibility is corrected. And I want to note the specific instruction, because it's more than "don't be obvious." It's an active concealment. Put oil on your head. Wash your face. Do the things a person does on an ordinary, comfortable day deliberately, so that the evidence of difficulty is erased. He's asking for a small, sustained performance in the opposite direction from what we naturally do, because our natural direction is unmistakable. We want the cost to show, not crudely. Most of us are too sophisticated to announce our sacrifices outright, but we let them leak. The slight weariness in the voice, the mention that we didn't sleep much, the way "I've had a difficult week" gets deployed at exactly the moment it will be noticed. We are extraordinarily skilled at making our burdens visible while maintaining plausible deniability that we were trying to. And the reason is not really vanity. I think it's loneliness. Hidden difficulty is difficulty carried alone, and that's genuinely hard, and something in us reaches for a witness. That reaching isn't wicked, it's human. But Jesus is pointing out that the moment the witness arrives, something in the transaction closes. They have received their reward in full. Not a punishment, a settlement. You wanted to be seen, you were seen. The account is balanced, and there's nothing further coming because you already collected. What he's protecting is the possibility of something happening between you and God that has no other observer and therefore no other payment. Now, this doesn't mean never tell anyone anything. That reading would forbid friendship. There's a difference between confiding in someone because you need help and broadcasting because you need credit. And you know which you're doing, even when you pretend the confiding was incidental. Here's the practice. The next hard thing you undertake voluntarily, the fast, the early morning, the money you gave that you needed, the visit you made that cost you a day, tell no one, not one person. And watch what rises in you when the opportunity to mention it comes and goes unused. That rising is the thing being addressed. Learning to let it pass unfed is the entire exercise. 22. Forgive us our debts, as we forgive our debtors. We're now inside the prayer he taught, and this line is the only one in it with a condition attached, and he doubles down on it immediately afterward, which he doesn't do for any other petition. If you forgive others their trespasses, your heavenly Father will also forgive you. But if you do not forgive others, neither will your Father forgive your trespasses. That's alarming. It has alarmed serious people for 2,000 years, and I don't think we should diffuse it too quickly, because the discomfort is doing intentional work. Let me say first what I don't think it means. I don't think it means God's forgiveness is a wage paid for your performance, purchasable by sufficient magnanimity. That reading collapses grace entirely and contradicts nearly everything else he taught. Here's what I think is being described. Forgiveness is not a substance that gets deposited into a container. It's a flow. It comes in and it goes out, and the going out is not a separate act. It's the same movement continuing. So a person who refuses to forgive isn't someone who has received grace and declined to pass it on. They're someone in whom the flow has been stopped, and a stopped flow doesn't fill up. It just stops. Try to picture the alternative, and it becomes incoherent. A person genuinely overwhelmed by the scale of what they've been forgiven, standing in front of someone who owes them considerably less, saying no. That's the parable of the unforgiving servant, and the reason it lands as monstrous is that it is incoherent. The man's behavior demonstrates that he never actually understood what happened to him. He experienced the release as a lucky outcome, not as mercy. And the story's ending isn't God being petty, it's the revelation that the first transaction never landed, which reframes the alarming line. It's not earn forgiveness by forgiving, it's closer to your treatment of your debtors is the readout of whether you've understood your own position, and that's diagnostic rather than transactional, which is a different kind of uncomfortable, because you can't game a diagnostic. You can't forgive strategically in order to secure your own pardon. That's just the unforgiving servant again, with better manners. The word debts is worth holding, though, because it's the most honest word available for what happened to you. Something was taken. There is a balance. Forgiveness doesn't work by pretending the ledger is empty. That's why Just Let It Go fails so completely as advice. The debt is real. Forgiveness is the decision to stop attempting collection on a debt that will never, in this life, be paid. That's all it is. Not pretending it didn't happen, not saying it was acceptable, stopping the collection effort. And if you've been trying to collect for 11 years from someone who does not have the currency, who may be dead, who may not remember, who may be genuinely incapable of giving you what you're owed, then you already know what that effort costs and how little it has ever returned. 23. Deliver us from evil, and the whole shape of asking. I want to take the Lord's Prayer as a single command for a moment because Jesus introduces it as an instruction in form. This, then, is how you should pray. He's giving a shape, and the shape is itself teaching. Look at the order: Father, and relationship first. Your name, your kingdom, your will, God's concerns before mine. 3 petitions deep before a single personal need appears. Then bread. Then forgiveness. Then protection. We invert this almost universally. We open with need, because need is what drives us to pray in the first place. Most of our prayer begins somewhere around bread and never gets any further up the list. And then we wonder why prayer feels transactional. It feels transactional because we've structured it as a transaction and skipped every part that wasn't one. The shape is corrective. It puts your need in a position, not eliminated, not shamed, but located inside something larger. Daily bread arrives after the kingdom, and the placement changes what it means. It stops being the whole point of prayer and becomes one true request among several. And notice how modest the request is. Bread, daily, not security, not a year's supply, not resolution of the situation causing the anxiety. Bread, today. The prayer he taught contains no petition for certainty about the future, which is worth sitting with, given that certainty about the future is what most of our praying is actually reaching for. Then deliver us from evil, and the honest thing to say about that line is that it's a request that visibly goes unanswered for many faithful people. Terrible things happen to people who prayed this every morning. Any teaching that skates past that is not worth your time. I don't have a resolution. What I notice is that Jesus prayed a version of this himself in Gethsemane, "Take this cup," and it was not granted, which means the man who taught this prayer also prayed for deliverance and went to the cross anyway. Whatever this petition is, it isn't a guarantee, and he knew that better than anyone when he handed it over. What it seems to be is the correct posture, dependent, asking, not pretending to self-sufficiency. Someone who prays, "Deliver us," is someone who has admitted they can be overwhelmed. That admission is itself a form of sanity, and its absence is a form of madness we've learned to call competence. 24. Do not be like the hypocrites. The word hypocrites is a theater word. It meant an actor, one who speaks from behind a mask. Not originally a moral term at all. Jesus took a technical term from the stage and made it the name for a spiritual condition, and the metaphor carries the entire meaning. An actor isn't lying exactly. Everyone in the theater knows. The problem with religious hypocrisy is that the audience doesn't know. The mask is presented as a face. But here's the part that gets missed, and it's the more dangerous part. The actor knows he's acting. In the theater, the man behind the mask is fully aware of the distinction between himself and the character. The spiritual version is worse because the mask can be worn long enough that the wearer forgets. That's the real terror of this condition. Not that you're deceiving others, but that you have become the last person capable of detecting it. Which is why hypocrisy is the one sin Jesus attacks with real heat. He's gentle with the greedy, the promiscuous, the violent, the traitorous. Genuinely gentle, the tax collectors and the woman at the well get warmth and invitation. He reserves his hardest language almost exclusively for religious people performing righteousness. And I think the reason is diagnostic rather than moral ranking. The other conditions are visible to their sufferers. This one isn't. A greedy man knows he wants money. A hypocrite has installed a system that specifically prevents self-knowledge. So how would you detect it in yourself, given that undetectability is the defining feature? A few probes. Is there a gap between how you speak about God in public and how you think about God alone? Not a gap in vocabulary. Everyone's private thoughts are less polished. A gap in content. Do you say things about faith you don't actually believe when nobody's listening? Does your family recognize the person other people describe? This one's brutal and reliable. The people who see you unperformed have the most accurate data in existence about you, and they're usually not consulted. What happens in you when you're criticized? The masked person cannot receive criticism because the mask is load-bearing. A crack anywhere threatens the whole structure. Disproportionate defensiveness is nearly always a sign that something is being protected that shouldn't need protecting. The remedy isn't to try harder at sincerity. You can perform sincerity. It's one of the easier things to perform. The remedy is to have at least one person and 1 hour with God in which the mask is off, because the mask cannot survive being seen from the inside by someone else who doesn't leave. 25. Be perfect as your heavenly Father is perfect. This is where a lot of people quietly close the book, because it reads as impossible, and impossibility, delivered as command, produces despair. Plenty of listeners have carried this verse for decades as evidence of their inadequacy, a standard held above them that they will never reach, confirming the thing they already suspected about themselves. So let's look at the word, because the word does not mean what English perfect means. Teleios comes from telos, end, purpose, completion. It means having reached its intended end, mature, whole, fully what it was designed to be. A teleios fruit is a ripe fruit. A teleios person is a finished person, not a flawless one. That's an entirely different demand. English perfect means without defect, a standard of 0 error measured against an ideal. Teleios means fully developed, a standard of completion measured against a design. One of those is a judgment, the other is a trajectory, and the context confirms it decisively. This verse doesn't stand alone. It's the conclusion of the passage on loving enemies. Sun rising on evil and good, rain on righteous and unrighteous. Love those who don't love you. Therefore, be perfect as your Father is perfect. The perfection under discussion is specifically the completeness of love that excludes no one. That's what God's teleios consists of in this passage, not moral flawlessness in the abstract, but love that has no edges, no exceptions, no category of person outside it. So the command is, let your love reach its full extent. Stop having a boundary at which it stops. That's what maturity is, which is still enormously demanding. But it's demanding in a way you can actually move toward. And the difference between an impossible standard and a demanding direction is the difference between despair and work. And here's what I'd say to whoever has been flattened by this verse. Perfectionism, the English kind, is not what's being asked of you here, and it may in fact be an obstacle to what is. Because perfectionism is intensely self-focused. It's a preoccupation with your own record, your own failures, your own standing. And the teleios in this passage points entirely outward, toward the enemy, toward the one who doesn't deserve it, toward the extension of love past its comfortable limit. You can be paralyzed by your own imperfection, while your love remains as narrow as it was 10 years ago. That's the trap. It looks like high standards. It's actually a way of staying in the mirror. Part 2. The commands that reshape how you speak. 26. Out of the overflow of the heart, the mouth speaks. Technically, this is a statement rather than an imperative, but it functions as a command in its consequences, and it's the doorway into everything about speech. So we start here. A good man brings good things out of the good stored up in him, and an evil man brings evil things out of the evil stored up in him. For the mouth speaks what the heart is full of. The image is a container that has been filled past its capacity. Overflow isn't chosen, that's the point. Overflow is what happens when the vessel is jostled, the contents come over the side, and what comes over is whatever was inside, which tells you what your speech is. It's not a communication system, it's a readout. And this is why the standard approach to controlling our words fails so consistently. We treat speech as a discipline problem. Think before you speak, count to 10, hold your tongue. Those aren't useless, they're the lid. But a lid on a full vessel is a temporary arrangement, and everyone who's tried it knows exactly how temporary. You hold it for 6 days, and then someone jostles you at the wrong moment, and the whole thing comes over the side, and afterward you say, I don't know where that came from. You do know. It came from inside. It was always there. The pressure didn't create it. The pressure revealed it, which is either bad news or extraordinarily useful news depending on what you do with it. Here's the useful version. Your worst moments of speech are the most accurate diagnostic information you will ever receive about your own interior. Not your best moments. Those can be managed. The thing you said when you were exhausted and provoked, and it came out before you could stop it. That's the readout. That's what's in the container. So the question after you say something you regret isn't only how do I stop doing that, it's what does that reveal is stored up in me. Contempt for that person, perhaps, that you've been maintaining politely for years. Resentment about a situation you claim to have accepted. Fear that comes out as anger, because anger is the only form of fear you learn to express. That's not comfortable information, but it's real information, and it's pointing at the actual location of the problem, which is not the mouth. And notice, this cuts both ways. The overflow principle means that filling is available as a strategy. You cannot police your way to good speech, but you can change what's in the container. What you consume, what you dwell on, what you rehearse in the car, who you spend time with, what you read at night. All of that is filling. And in 5 years, it will come over the side. In the moment you're not managing yourself, and it will be exactly what you put in. 27. You will give account for every careless word. I tell you that everyone will have to give account on the day of judgment for every empty word they have spoken. Argos, the word rendered careless or idle, means unemployed, inactive, not working. He's describing words that do no labor, words that were spoken and accomplished nothing, built nothing, healed nothing. That's a much stranger category than we usually assume. We'd expect the warning to be about harmful words, lies, cruelty, slander, but the target here is words that are merely inert, the offhand comment, the thing said to fill silence, the joke at someone's expense that everyone, including the target, laughed at, the critical observation about someone not present, delivered as an aside, entirely accurate and completely pointless. Why would those matter enough to be accounted for? I think because of the overflow principle we just looked at. Careless words are the ones spoken without management, which makes them the truest words you speak. The considered statement passes through your editor. The idle remark doesn't. So the throwaway line is more revealing of you than your carefully constructed opinions, and any accurate account of who you are would weight it accordingly. There's also the matter of what idle words do, despite doing no work. A word can be idle in intention and enormously consequential in effect. The thing you said about your child in passing in front of them, not meaning anything by it, you don't remember it. They're 43 and they remember it exactly. The remark you made about a colleague that shifted how 3 people saw them permanently, you've forgotten. The effect hasn't. That's the terrible asymmetry of speech. It costs nothing to produce and can cost a great deal to receive, and the person producing almost never knows. Now, I want to hold this carefully, because turned the wrong direction, it produces a person who is anxious about every sentence, and Jesus was not anxious about sentences. He joked, he used hyperbole. He was, by the evidence of the Gospels, sharp and quick, and occasionally very funny. This is not a command toward verbal paralysis. It's a command toward weight, toward taking seriously that speech is an act with consequences that outlive the speaker's memory of it, which produces in practice something quite simple, a slight increase in the gap between impulse and utterance, not silence, just a half-second more in which the question, does this do any work, has room to arrive. Most of the damage in most families would have been prevented by half a second. 28. Let your speech be seasoned, the command against contempt. Anyone who says to his brother Raka is answerable to the court, and anyone who says, you fool, will be in danger of the fire of hell. We have to deal with the escalation here because it's shocking. Murder, then anger, then an insult. and the insult is placed in the most severe category. That looks disproportionate to the point of absurdity, and the disproportion is deliberate. Racha is an Aramaic term of contempt. Roughly, empty one, worthless, not a swear word, a dismissal. It's what you say about a person whose existence you regard as adding nothing. And Jesus places that alongside murder because of what they share. Murder ends a person's existence. Contempt ends a person's existence in your mind. It's the internal version of the same act. You have removed them from the category of beings who matter. And having done that, everything that follows is downstream. You can be cruel to them without friction, ignore their suffering without discomfort, speak about them in any way you like, because the being you're speaking about is no longer fully a being to you. That's why he treats it as belonging on the same continuum. Contempt is the psychological precondition for every atrocity anyone has ever committed. No one harms someone they still regard as fully human. The dehumanizing has to happen first, and it happens in language, and it usually happens in small, deniable, entirely ordinary words. Now here's where this becomes uncomfortably current. Contempt is the dominant emotional register of public speech in our moment. Not disagreement, contempt. The tone that treats the other side not as wrong but as beneath response. And most of us have absorbed it so thoroughly that we no longer hear it as contempt. We hear it as being informed. You can measure it in yourself easily enough. Think of a political or religious group you're not part of. Notice the tone that arises internally when you think of them. Is it disagreement? I think they're mistaken about X. Or is it dismissal? Those people are idiots. The second one is raka, exactly, in modern dress. And the reason this belongs in a section about speech is that contempt is almost entirely a verbal habit. It's maintained by the way we describe people. Change the description, and the internal state follows more than you'd expect. Describe someone as mistaken rather than worthless for a month, and you will find you can no longer summon the old certainty about them. The command, stated positively, keep everyone in the category of persons, even when they're wrong, even when they've hurt you, even when the dismissal would be satisfying and everyone around you would agree. 29. Do not tell anyone. The command of restraint. Over and over in the Gospels, Jesus heals someone and then instructs them to say nothing. The leper, Jairus' daughter, the blind men. See that no one knows about this. It's strange enough that scholars have a name for it. And on the surface, it seems counterproductive. Surely the point is for people to know. Whatever the historical reasons, there's a principle here about speech that has real application. Not everything true needs to be said, and not everything said needs to be said now. We live under an assumption that expression is always healthy, that holding something back is repression, that the authentic move is to speak, that saying the true thing is nearly always right. And that assumption has caused an enormous amount of avoidable damage, because the timing and the audience of a truth are not separate from the truth's effect. The same accurate sentence can heal at one moment and destroy at another. There's a particular version of this that does the most harm, the truth told for the speaker's relief rather than the hearer's good. The confession that transfers a burden from you to someone who now has to carry it and can do nothing with it. The honest assessment delivered to someone who didn't ask and can't change it. The revelation to a child about a parent that the child will carry for 40 years, delivered because they deserved to know when the actual driver was that you were tired of holding it. Ask before speaking something weighty. Whose burden does this move, and in which direction? And restraint is not the same as deception. Withholding is not lying. There's a difference between concealing something someone needs and simply not saying everything you happen to know. The mature speaker has a large quantity of unspoken accurate information, and the size of that quantity is a decent measure of their trustworthiness. Consider that some of what you're carrying about other people was told to you by someone who should have restrained it, and consider what you are currently holding that would be better held. 30. Do not be called rabbi, the command against status language. You are not to be called rabbi, for you have one teacher and you are all brothers. And do not call anyone on earth father, nor are you to be called instructors. This lands in a passage of sustained criticism of religious leaders, and the target is precise: the way titles function. The passage immediately before describes people who love the place of honor at banquets and the most important seats and being greeted in the marketplaces. The complaint isn't that they teach, it's that the teaching has become a vehicle for position. Now, obviously this hasn't been observed literally. Christianity has produced more titles than almost any institution in history, and I don't think a wooden reading is right. Paul calls himself a father to Timothy without apparent guilt. What's forbidden is a relationship structure, and the reason is given plainly: you are all brothers. The problem with title language is that it establishes a permanent asymmetry. Between brothers, correction flows both directions. Between rabbi and student, it flows one way, and a person who cannot be corrected by those below them will eventually go wrong in a way no one can stop. That's the mechanism, and church history is a long demonstration of it. But I want to bring this out of institutions, because most of you aren't religious leaders and might file this as someone else's problem. The status asymmetry problem shows up in ordinary speech constantly, and it's usually invisible. It's in how you speak to people who serve you. Whether the register changes, whether the voice you use for the waiter is the voice you use for the person you're eating with. That's a title relationship without the title, and it's audible. It's in whether your adult children are permitted to tell you that you were wrong about something, whether that conversation is available, or whether the relationship has a permanent structural asymmetry in which you are the parent and correction only descends. It's in whether anyone in your life can say the hard thing to you, genuinely can. Not whether you'd claim to be open to it, whether anyone has actually done it in the last 2 years and remained close afterward. If the answer is no, you have accepted a title, whatever it's called. And the danger isn't pride exactly. It's that you've removed the only feedback mechanism that could have told you where you were going wrong, and now you'll find out much later, from consequences, rather than early, from someone who loved you. 31. Whoever exalts himself will be humbled. The verse that closes that same passage, and it's stated as a law rather than a threat, an if-then about how reality operates. Notice it's not should be humbled, it's will be. He's describing a mechanism, and the mechanism is worth understanding because it explains a great deal of what you've watched happen to people. Self-exaltation is a claim about yourself that reality has not yet verified, and reality, given enough time, always gets around to auditing. The person who claims more competence than they possess will eventually face a task that requires the claimed competence. The person who has cultivated an image will eventually be seen unperformed. Everyone is, eventually, by someone who talks. The gap between the claim and the truth is a debt, and debts come due. That's the humbling. It's not usually God striking someone down. It's just the arrival of the bill. And the second half, whoever humbles himself will be exalted, works by the same logic in reverse. The person who claims less than they are creates a gap in the other direction, and when reality audits them, it finds more than was advertised. That produces trust. Trust compounds. Over 20 years, the difference between those two positions is not subtle. But here's the trap, and we hit it earlier with last shall be first. You cannot use humility as a strategy for exaltation. The moment self-humbling becomes a method for getting raised up, it's self-exaltation with a longer time horizon, and it will be audited on exactly the same terms, because the claim underneath it, "I am the sort of person who is humble," is precisely the kind of claim reality is good at testing. There's no way around this one. It cannot be gamed, and the ungameability is the point. So, what does genuine self-humbling look like in speech? Since that's our section. Mostly it looks like accuracy, not self-deprecation. That's often its own performance, a bid for reassurance. Accuracy. Being able to say, "I don't know," when you don't. Being able to say, "That was my fault," without the softening clause that redistributes it. Being able to describe your own contribution to something without inflation and without the false modesty that invites correction. Accurate speech about yourself is rarer than either boasting or self-deprecation, and it's the only one of the three that's actually humble. 32. Let the one who has ears hear. He says it constantly, after parables, after hard sayings, as a kind of closing punctuation. He who has ears to hear, let him hear. It's a command about listening, which belongs in a section on speech, because listening is the other half of speech, and the half nobody trains. And the phrasing is odd if you look at it. Everyone in the crowd has ears. The organ isn't the issue. He's distinguishing between possessing the apparatus and performing the act, which means hearing, real hearing, is something additional, something that can be present or absent while the physical process goes on unchanged. We all know this from the receiving end. You've talked to someone who was clearly hearing every word and receiving none of them. They could repeat your sentences back. They were waiting. The whole time you spoke, they were assembling their response, and your words were being processed only for the material they offered. That's the default human mode of listening, and most of us do it most of the time. Real hearing requires something that's genuinely difficult, the willingness to be changed by what you hear. That's the actual dividing line. If you enter a conversation with your position fixed, you cannot hear, regardless of how much attention you pay. Because hearing, in the sense he means, includes the possibility of coming out different than you went in. Which is why he attaches this phrase specifically to the parables. Parables don't work by transferring information. They work by presenting an image that reorganizes you if you let it and slides off entirely if you don't. Two people hear the same story. One is undone by it, and one thinks it was a nice story about farming. Same ears, different hearing. The practical version in your marriage, with your children, with the person you disagree with. Can you state their position in a way they'd recognize as fair? That's the test, not agree with it. State it accurately, without the small distortions that make it easier to dismiss. Most of us cannot about the people closest to us, and the inability is not a failure of intelligence. It's that we never listened with the possibility of being moved, so we only ever collected the version we needed. Let him hear. It's a command, which means it's a choice, which means it's available to you in the next conversation you have. 33. Say to this mountain, move. Truly I tell you, if anyone says to this mountain, go, throw yourself into the sea, and does not doubt in their heart, but believes that what they say will happen, it will be done for them. We have to be honest about this one, because it's been used to hurt people badly. It's the load-bearing verse for teaching that says, your circumstances reflect the quality of your faith. Which means that when the healing doesn't come, when the marriage ends, when the child dies, the explanation offered is that you didn't believe hard enough. The teaching has done more damage to more grieving people than almost anything else that flies under a Christian banner, and I want to name it as false before we go any further. Nobody has ever moved a literal mountain. Not one person in 2,000 years, including the apostles who had more faith than anyone reading this. If the verse means what the prosperity reading says, then everyone has failed, including the men who wrote it down. So what's the command? Because it is one. Say to this mountain. The command is about speech, specifically about speaking to obstacles rather than about them. And there's an enormous difference. Most of our language about the hard things in our lives is descriptive. We narrate the obstacle, catalogue it, explain it to ourselves and others. We become extremely fluent in the details of what's blocking us. And that fluency feels like engagement, but it's a form of worship. You have spent more words on the mountain than on anything else in your life. The mountain has been the subject of your speech for years. Speaking to it is a different posture entirely. It's addressing the obstacle as something subordinate, something spoken to rather than spoken of. That's not a technique for producing results. It's a reorientation of who's in charge in your own inner narration. And the mustard seed, which comes attached to this saying, cuts against the believe harder reading decisively. The point of the mustard seed is smallness. The amount required is negligible. Whatever this verse is about, it is explicitly not about the quantity of your faith. Jesus goes out of his way to say the quantity can be almost nothing, which means for the person who is currently grieving something that didn't move, this verse is not an accusation against you. It never was. What it asks of you is smaller and stranger than the prosperity reading suggests. That you stop narrating the mountain and speak to it once and see what happens in you. 34. Do not resist the evildoer with words of retaliation. The broader command in that passage, do not resist an evil person, has caused enormous confusion. And again, I want to be direct. This is not an instruction to remain in danger, and it has been used that way by people who should have known better. But there's a specific application to speech here that's practical and immediately usable. The verbal version of hitting back is the most automatic thing human beings do. Someone says something cutting, and the response arrives fully formed, before any decision, and the response is usually better than theirs. That's the thing. In the moment of being wounded, people become articulate. Some of the most precise sentences ever spoken were spoken by wounded people about the person who wounded them, and every one of them was regretted. Because here's the mechanism. A retaliatory sentence has to be aimed. To wound someone, you must know where they're vulnerable. And you know, because they told you. Probably in a moment of trust, possibly years ago, possibly in a bed at night when they were being more honest than they've ever been with anyone. So verbal retaliation inside intimacy is always a betrayal of confidence. It's using intelligence gathered under conditions of trust. And that's why those wounds don't heal like ordinary insults. The injury isn't the content of the sentence. It's the discovery that the safe thing was being stored as ammunition. Do not resist here means let the sentence land and do not fire back. Not because the other person is right, not because you deserve it, because the exchange, once entered, cannot be exited without casualties, and the person who declines the exchange is the only one who leaves intact. And practically, the thing that actually works, when the response is already forming and your mouth is already opening, is to say the thing you're feeling instead of the thing that would wound. Not, you've always been exactly like your mother. Just, that hurt. 4 syllables. Enormously harder to say than the cruel thing because it requires standing in the injury openly rather than converting it into force. But it's the only sentence that has ever ended one of these exchanges, and it ends them nearly every time. 35. Let the children come to me. The command about how we speak to the small. People were bringing little children to Jesus for him to place his hands on them, but the disciples rebuked them. When Jesus saw this, he was indignant and said, "Let the little children come to me, and do not hinder them." That word indignant appears rarely about Jesus. He's angry here, genuinely, visibly, and it's worth asking what triggered it. because the disciples weren't doing anything malicious. They were managing his schedule. They were protecting a tired man from an interruption of no obvious importance. By any reasonable assessment of who mattered in that world, children were the lowest value use of a teacher's time, and the disciples were being sensible. That's what made him angry, the sensibleness. And what I want to draw out is what this says about how we speak to people who cannot advance us, because children in that economy had nothing to offer. No status to confer, no reciprocity, no ability to advocate for you later. A person's treatment of children was therefore an unusually pure signal. There was no possible ulterior motive, which meant whatever you did with them was who you actually were. The same is true now with a wider category. How do you speak to people who can do nothing for you? The person cleaning the building after hours, the elderly relative who repeats themselves, the junior colleague whose name you haven't learned, the person on the phone whose job it is to absorb your frustration. That register, the one you use when there's no advantage available, is the most honest thing about you. Everything else can be a strategy. That can't be. And with actual children specifically, they are receiving the tone far more than the content. You will not remember what you said. They will not remember what you said either. They will remember with permanent precision whether they were an interruption, whether their questions were welcome, whether the face that turned toward them was glad. That's what Jesus did in that moment, and it's the whole of the instruction. He stopped. He turned. He was glad they came. 36. Go and tell. The command to speak what you've received. Almost every encounter with Jesus ends with a version of this. Go home to your own people and tell them how much the Lord has done for you. Go and tell John what you hear and see. And at the end, the largest version, go and make disciples. The pattern is consistent. Receive, then speak. Nothing is given to be kept. Now this makes a lot of people uncomfortable, and I understand why. Go and tell has been operationalized into some of the most socially destructive behavior in modern Christianity. The ambush conversation, the tract left instead of a tip, the relationship maintained as a project. Many of you have been on the receiving end of that, and it's part of why you're watching a video alone rather than sitting in a building. So let's look at what's actually commanded, because it's much more specific and much more modest than what's been made of it. Tell them how much the Lord has done for you. That's testimony, and testimony has a particular grammar. It's first person and it's past tense. It's a report of what happened to you. It is not an argument, not a diagnosis of the hearer, not a warning about their condition. A witness in a courtroom is not permitted to argue the case. They're permitted to say what they saw. That constraint is protective for everyone. It keeps the speaker in the only territory they have any authority over, their own experience, which cannot be refuted, because nobody can tell you what did or didn't happen to you. And it keeps the hearer uncornered, because a story makes no demand. And notice where the man in that account is sent. Go home to your own people, not to a stage, not to strangers. Home, to the hardest audience there is, the people who knew you before, who have every reason to be skeptical, who have watched you claim to be different before. That's the actual assignment for most of us. Not evangelism as a program. Just being someone whose life visibly changed, among people who knew you when it hadn't, and being willing to say plainly what happened when they ask. They will ask, eventually, if something actually happened. 37. Agree with your adversary quickly. Settle matters quickly with your adversary who is taking you to court. Do it while you are still together on the way. The image is legal, and the urgency is the whole point. Two men walking the same road to court. They have a window, the length of the road, and after that the matter passes into a system, and the system will resolve it in a way neither of them controls. While you are still on the way. That's the phrase to hold, because every conflict has a road length. a period during which it's still between two people, still adjustable, still soft. And then it hardens. Positions get stated to third parties and become commitments. Lawyers get involved, or family members, or the entire church. And now the dispute has an audience, and the cost of backing down has multiplied. What could have been settled in a difficult 20 minutes now cannot be settled at all, because settling would require both people to be seen changing their position in front of everyone they've told. This is why conflicts that could have ended in week 1 run for decades. Not because the original injury was so large. Because the road ran out and the command specifies quickly, which cuts directly against how most of us handle conflict. Our instinct is delay. Let things cool. Wait for the right moment. And there's real wisdom in not addressing something at peak heat. But let it cool almost always becomes let it set. Cooling and hardening are the same process. You cannot pause a conflict, you can only let it cure. Notice too that it says settle with your adversary, not your friend who misunderstood you, the person actively against you, whose case is opposed to yours, who may well be in the wrong. The command doesn't ask you to determine who's right first. It asks you to go to them while going is still possible. So, the conversation you've been putting off, the one where you're waiting for a better moment, more clarity, the right words. How long has it been on the road? And do you have any evidence from your own life that waiting has ever made one of these easier? 38. Speak the truth about yourself. Confess. Not stated as a single crisp command, but woven throughout. The tax collector who won't lift his eyes and says, "God, have mercy on me, a sinner," and goes home justified, while the man who catalogued his virtues does not. Two men, same building, same hour. One speaks accurately about himself and one doesn't, and that's the entire difference in the story. And the Pharisee's prayer is worth looking at closely because we caricature him and lose the point. What he says is true. He does fast twice a week. He does tithe. He isn't a thief or an adulterer. There's no lying in his prayer. Every claim is factual. His problem isn't inaccuracy about his behavior. It's the comparison. I thank you that I am not like other people, robbers, evildoers, adulterers, or even like this tax collector. He can only locate himself relative to someone worse. His righteousness is entirely positional. It requires the other man to exist. That's the most common form of self-deception there is, and it's nearly undetectable because it runs on true statements. You are, in fact, better than some people at some things. The ledger is real, and as long as you keep the comparison running, you'll never have to look at yourself in absolute terms, only in rank. And rank is always available if you choose your comparison carefully enough. The tax collector does something different. He makes no comparison at all. He speaks about himself with nobody else in the frame, which is the only way anyone has ever seen themselves clearly. And confession, properly understood, is exactly that. Accurate speech about yourself with no one else in the sentence. No context that redistributes it. No explanation of what they did first. No, "I was tired." Just the thing, named. This is enormously difficult, and it's the reason most confession, spoken to God or to another person, accomplishes nothing. We confess in a way that argues. We say the thing, and then immediately supply the frame that makes it understandable, and by the end of the sentence it's been converted into something that happened to us. Try saying it once, with no frame. Just the sentence. I was cruel to her. Nothing after. And notice how badly everything in you wants to add the next clause. The tax collector went home justified. The other man went home exactly as he came. 39. Do not put the Lord your God to the test. This is Jesus quoting Deuteronomy back at the devil in the wilderness, and it's a command about a specific kind of speech, the speech that demands proof. The proposal was, Throw yourself down from the temple, because Scripture says angels will catch you. And notice it's a scripturally justified request. The tempter quotes accurately. The proposal is, make God demonstrate himself, and here's the verse authorizing it. Jesus refuses on the grounds that it constitutes a test. What's wrong with testing God? At first glance, it seems reasonable. If he's real, why not ask for evidence? And there are people in Scripture who ask for signs and receive them, so this isn't a blanket prohibition on wanting to know. The difference, I think, is the posture. A test is constructed by someone who has already positioned themselves as the evaluator. It's not a question, it's an examination with a pass mark, administered by you. And that arrangement makes relationships structurally impossible, because you cannot simultaneously trust someone and be running a continuous assessment of their reliability. You know this from human relationships. There's a particular kind of person who's always testing, setting up small situations to see whether you'll come through, never quite asking directly, keeping score. And that behavior is almost always born of injury. It's what people do after being let down badly. But however understandable, it makes intimacy unreachable, because a test can be passed 100 times, and the 101st is always still pending. That's the trap this command is protecting you from. If your relationship with God is structured as an ongoing examination, if this works out, I'll believe. If the healing comes, I'll trust. Then no result will ever be sufficient. There's always another exam. And you will experience decades of God's actual presence as a series of inconclusive data points. The alternative isn't credulity. It's asking rather than testing. Ask and it will be given. That was Command 8, and it's the same speech act pointed in a different direction. Asking is done from inside relationship. Testing is done from outside, with a clipboard, same request. Entirely different position of the speaker, and you know which one you're doing. 40. Watch your words about others. Do not slander. The things that come out of a person's mouth come from the heart, and these defile them. For out of the heart come evil thoughts, murder, adultery, sexual immorality, theft, false testimony, slander. Look at that list and notice the company slander keeps. It's placed alongside murder and adultery in the same sentence without qualification. Most of us have an internal severity ranking in which slander sits somewhere near the bottom, a minor social failing, and Jesus doesn't appear to share the ranking. Blasphemia here means damaging speech about someone, injury delivered through description, and it deserves its placement because of a property nothing else on that list has. It's irreversible. A theft can be repaid. A wound can heal. But a sentence about a person, once released into a community, cannot be retrieved. It travels. It gets repeated by people who don't know the source. It reaches individuals you'll never meet, who will form a permanent impression of someone they've never met, based on your sentence. And you cannot go and collect it, even if you spend the rest of your life trying, because you don't know where it went. The most common form is not malicious. That's what makes it so widespread. It's the concerned version, the sharing of information about someone's difficulties, framed as care. I'm worried about her. And then the details which are accurate, which were told to you in confidence, and which the person you're telling now knows permanently about someone who didn't consent to being known that way. Concern is the most efficient delivery mechanism slander has ever had, because it feels like love while it operates. Here's a test that cuts through the self-deception. Would I say this in front of them? Not, would I be embarrassed? Would the sentence, delivered with them present, still be an acceptable thing to say? If it would need to be softened, reframed, or contextualized in their presence, it wasn't fit to be said in their absence. And the harder second test, does the person I'm telling need this information to help? If they can do nothing, If they're not in a position to act, if they're simply an audience, then what's being transferred isn't concern. It's a reputation, and it's being handed to someone who has no use for it except to hold it against a person they'll now see differently forever. 41. Forgive 70 times 7. Peter asks the question everyone asks, and the way he asks it tells you everything about how we approach this. Lord, how many times shall I forgive my brother who sins against me? Up to 7 times? He's being generous. The rabbinic standard of his day was 3, forgive a repeated offense 3 times, and after that you're released from the obligation. Peter more than doubles it. He arrives with what he believes is an impressively expansive number, and he's clearly expecting to be commended. Not 7 times, but 70 times 7. And the point is not that the correct number is 490. The point is that Peter asked the wrong kind of question. He wanted a limit, a threshold past which he could stop and still be righteous. And Jesus responds with a number so large that counting becomes absurd. If you're keeping a tally to 490, you're keeping a tally, and the tally is the problem. Because here's what a limit does. A limit means every act of forgiveness is also a decrement. You forgive, and something is used up. 4 left, 3 left. And the person being forgiven can feel the countdown even if nothing is said. There's a particular quality to being forgiven by someone who is running out. That's not forgiveness. That's deferred judgment on an installment plan. Now, I need to say something important here, because this command has been used to trap people in genuinely dangerous situations. Forgive 70 times 7 is not stay 70 times 7. It is not a command to remain in reach of someone who is harming you. Forgiveness and reconciliation are 2 different things. Forgiveness is something you do internally, alone, and it requires nothing from the other person. Reconciliation requires 2 people, and it requires change. You can fully forgive someone and never see them again, and there is nothing in Scripture that forbids that. If you are being harmed, leave and forgive from a distance if and when you can. Anyone who has told you this verse requires you to stay has handled it wickedly. What the command addresses is the interior posture, the tally, the countdown, the accumulating case. Because the case is what most of us are actually carrying. Not one injury, a file, every instance dated, cross-referenced, available for retrieval. And the file exists because at some point we decided that letting go of the record would mean the record didn't matter. It mattered. That's why the file hurts to hold. 70 times 7 is Jesus saying, put the file down, not because it's inaccurate, because you have been carrying it for 11 years, and it is not making anything better, and there is no number at the end of it where you get to set it down honorably. There was never going to be a number. That's what he's telling Peter. 42. Forgive from your heart. The parable of the unforgiving servant ends with this phrase, and it's the phrase that makes the whole thing difficult. This is how my heavenly Father will treat each of you unless you forgive your brother from your heart. From your heart, not verbally, not formally, not as a completed transaction that leaves the interior untouched. And this is where most of us discover we haven't done it. Because there's a version of forgiveness that's essentially administrative. You decide, as an act of will, that you will no longer pursue the matter. You say the words, perhaps to God, perhaps to the person. You close the file officially, and then you notice, 3 years later, that their name still produces something in your chest, that you rehearse the argument in the shower, that you have a small, unwelcome satisfaction when you hear things aren't going well for them, so you conclude you failed, that the forgiveness didn't take, that you're spiritually deficient. I want to offer a different reading because I think that conclusion has crushed a lot of sincere people. Forgiveness from the heart is not an event, it's a direction of travel, and the initial decision is the first step rather than the arrival. Jesus tells Peter to forgive 70 times 7 for the same offense, and it's usually read as 70 times 7 offenses. But anyone who has tried to forgive something large knows the other reading is also true. You forgive the same injury repeatedly. It comes back. You forgive it again. It comes back smaller. You forgive it again. That's not failure. That's what the process actually looks like from the inside. And the people who tell you it should be one clean act have generally not forgiven anything expensive. What from the heart rules out is the forgiveness that was never intended to reach the heart. The formal release that's really a way of ending a conversation, or of occupying the moral high ground, or of avoiding the actual work of feeling what was done. That version is recognizable by its stability. It never gets worse and never gets better. It sits exactly where it was placed, because nothing was ever actually moved. Real forgiveness is unstable. It gets worse before it gets better. It requires you to feel the full size of the debt before you can release it. And feeling the full size is the part everyone tries to skip. You cannot forgive a debt you have not counted. That's why the parable begins with an accounting. 10,000 talents, an absurd, unpayable sum, named precisely. The number is stated before the release. He looked at it, then he let it go. 43. Bless those who curse you. Bless those who curse you. Pray for those who mistreat you. We touched the praying earlier. I want to take the blessing on its own because it's a distinct act and a stranger one. To bless someone is to actively will their good, not to tolerate them, not to release them from your case, to want things to go well for them. And to say so. That's an enormous escalation over neutrality, and I think most of us privately hope the requirement stops well short of it. We could manage indifference. We could manage no longer actively wishing harm. Blessing is something else entirely because it requires you to be genuinely glad if the person who hurt you flourishes. And the honest response to that for anyone with a real injury is, I can't. Not today. Possibly not ever. So let me say what I think is actually being asked, because I don't think it's an emotional demand. Blessing, in the Hebrew sense underneath this, is a speech act before it's a feeling. To bless is to speak good over someone. And you can speak what you do not yet feel, not as hypocrisy, but as a deliberate act of directing your will ahead of your emotions and letting the emotions catch up, which they eventually do. Because human beings are built such that sustained action reshapes effect rather than the reverse. That's the whole mechanism. You've been waiting to feel forgiving before you act forgiving. It runs the other way. It has always run the other way. Say their name. Ask God for something good for them, specifically, not vaguely. Not bless them in the abstract, which costs nothing. Something they'd actually want. Their business to succeed. Their child to be well. Their marriage to hold. The first time you do this, it will feel like a lie, and it will be difficult in a way that's hard to describe to anyone who hasn't tried it. Something in you will resist at the level of the body. Do it anyway. Do it for 6 weeks. And here's what I've watched happen in myself and in others. The resistance is not permanent. It erodes. Somewhere around week 4, something shifts. And it isn't that you've decided they were right. It's that they've stopped occupying the position of enemy in your internal architecture. And once that position is vacated, an extraordinary amount of energy is returned to you that you didn't know was being spent. You've been paying rent on that grudge every day for years. Blessing is how you stop. 44. Judge not, and you will not be judged. Condemn not, and you will not be condemned. Forgive, and you will be forgiven. Luke's version has an extra clause the more famous version lacks, and it's worth attending to because it separates 2 things we usually merge. Judge not, condemn not, forgive. 3 distinct acts, escalating. Judging is forming the verdict. Condemning is passing the sentence. Forgiving is the 3rd thing, the release of the sentence already passed. And that ordering matters because most of us are somewhere in the middle without knowing it. We think we've forgiven when what we've actually done is stop mentioning the condemnation. The verdict stands. The sentence stands. We've simply gone quiet about it. Here's how you can tell. A condemned person in your internal court has a permanent status. Everything they do gets read through it. If they're kind, it's calculated. If they've changed, it's temporary. If they succeed, it's undeserved. There's no evidence they could produce that would alter the finding because the finding was made and the case is closed, and new information is only ever processed as either confirmation or manipulation. That's condemnation, and it's compatible with never saying an unkind word about someone for a decade. The release from it comes in the final clause, and the sequence is worth noticing. It's the same measure language he uses next. With the measure you use, it will be measured to you, not as punishment, as a description of the instrument. Whatever standard you've built and calibrated is the standard you own, and you will find yourself measured by it because it's the only instrument in the room, and you brought it. The person who cannot forgive is living in a world where offenses are unforgivable. That's the world they built, and when they offend, as everyone does, they will be standing inside that same world, applying the only rule they've ever practiced to themselves. That's the mercy hidden in the warning. Change the instrument, and you change what you'll be measured by, not because God is watching to see if you comply, but because you'll no longer own a device capable of producing that verdict. 45. Father, forgive them, for they do not know what they are doing. He says this from the cross, mid-execution, about the men driving the nails. I want to sit here longer than usual, because this is the demonstration rather than the instruction, and it contains the piece of forgiveness that most teaching leaves out. They do not know what they're doing. That's not a legal excuse. He isn't claiming they're innocent. The request is for forgiveness, which presupposes guilt. What he's naming is something about the nature of the people doing it. They are operating with less understanding than they think they have. And this is, in my experience, the single most useful thing anyone has ever said about forgiving. Because the thing that makes forgiveness feel impossible is usually a specific belief. They knew exactly what they were doing to me. They saw the damage and continued. That belief is what turns an injury into an atrocity. And it's the load-bearing wall of most unforgiveness. And it is almost always false. Not because people aren't culpable. They are. But because almost nobody has the clarity we assign them in retrospect. The parent who damaged you was, in most cases, drowning in something you never saw, repeating something done to them, operating from a model of the world they'd never examined. The person who betrayed you was telling themselves a story in which they were the reasonable one. They always are. Nobody is the villain in their own account. The one who left was in a state you weren't given access to. None of that makes it acceptable. That's not what this line does. It doesn't reduce the debt by a penny. The request is still forgive them, which means the debt is fully acknowledged. What it does is remove malice from your picture of what happened, and malice is the ingredient that makes an injury unbearable. Being harmed by someone's blindness is grievous. Being harmed by someone's deliberate, clear-eyed, fully informed cruelty is something else, and most of us have been carrying the second story when the first one is the true one. Ask yourself honestly about the person you can't release. Did they understand what they were doing to me? Fully, with the clarity I have now after 20 years of thinking about it? Almost certainly not. Almost nobody does. Almost all human damage is done by people operating with partial information, inherited patterns, and a story in which they were responding reasonably to circumstances. And if that's true, then what you're holding is not a case against a monster. It's a case against someone who was, in some crucial way, asleep. That doesn't dissolve the debt, but it changes what it costs you to carry it, and it opens a door that was previously bolted. 46. If your brother sins against you, rebuke him, and if he repents, forgive him. This one corrects a misunderstanding that the previous commands can create. That forgiveness means silence. If your brother sins against you, rebuke him, and if he repents, forgive him. Even if he sins against you 7 times in a day, and 7 times comes back saying, I repent, forgive him. The word rebuke is doing something crucial. It means say it, name the offense. Go to the person and tell them what they did. And that instruction sits directly against the way most Christians handle being wronged, which is to say, nothing, forgive privately, and carry it. That approach feels humble. It's often the opposite, because unspoken forgiveness leaves the other person unaware, the relationship subtly altered, and the forgiver in permanent quiet possession of the moral advantage. Jesus commands confrontation first, not aggression. The word is closer to bringing something into the light, exposing it so it can be dealt with, but it's spoken out loud to the person's face. Why? Because forgiveness without naming can't produce reconciliation. It can produce peace in you, which is worth a great deal, but the relationship stays damaged in a way the other person doesn't understand and therefore cannot repair. They just notice you're different now, cooler, slightly further away, and they'll never know why, and they'll construct their own explanation, and it will usually be wrong. Half the estrangements in the world are built out of injuries the offender never knew they caused. Now, the conditional clause. If he repents, forgive him. This looks like it makes forgiveness contingent, which appears to contradict everything we've said. Two things. First, the forgiveness Jesus means here includes the restoration of the relationship, reconciliation, not just internal release. And that genuinely does require repentance, because a relationship cannot be restored with someone who intends to continue. Internal release is unconditional, restored trust is not, and anyone who tells you otherwise is setting you up to be harmed again. Second, look at the number. 7 times in a day. If someone sins against you 7 times in a single day and says, I repent 7 times, the sincerity of the 7th is questionable at best. And Jesus says, forgive anyway. He's deliberately removing your right to adjudicate the quality of their repentance, which is exactly the thing we most want to hold on to, the assessment of whether the apology was good enough. You don't get to grade it. That's the command. 47. Leave the 99 and go after the 1. This belongs in the forgiveness section, though it isn't usually placed there, because of what it says about how God relates to the one who has gone wrong. And because your forgiveness of others is downstream of your picture of that. Suppose one of you has 100 sheep and loses one of them. Doesn't he leave the 99 in the open country and go after the lost sheep until he finds it? The economics are questionable, which is the point. Risking 99 for 1 is not sound husbandry. It's a description of a valuation that doesn't compute by ordinary arithmetic. And notice how the sheep is characterized. Not rebellious, not defiant, lost. Sheep don't run away in a principled fashion. They wander head down, one patch of grass at a time, and look up eventually to find themselves somewhere unrecognizable, with no idea how they got there, and no capacity to find the way back. That's how most people end up far from where they meant to be. Not one dramatic decision. 1,000 small drifts, each defensible, and then a moment of looking up. If that's you, and for some of you it is, and you've been carrying a quiet certainty that you drifted too far to be worth retrieving, the parable is specifically about you. And the shepherd's behavior in it is the answer to your question. He goes until he finds it. There's no calculation about whether this particular sheep is worth the trouble. But here's why it belongs among the forgiveness commands. What you believe about how God treats the lost determines what you're capable of extending to the person who wronged you. If you believe God's mercy is fundamentally conditional, extended to the deserving, withdrawn from those who go too far, then you will replicate that structure exactly in your own relationships. You will have a threshold past which people become unforgivable, because you believe such a threshold exists in the universe. Your grace will have the same shape as the grace you think you received, and if you believe the shepherd goes after the one without calculation, then you have a model for something that looks foolish and is apparently how God actually operates, which makes your own foolish, uncalculated pursuit of a person who doesn't deserve it something other than weakness. It makes it family resemblance. 48. Let him who is without sin cast the first stone. A woman caught in adultery, a crowd with stones, a legal case that's technically sound. And Jesus writes in the dust and says one sentence, and the sentence dismantles the entire proceeding. Let any one of you who is without sin be the first to throw a stone at her. What that sentence does is change who's on trial. In one move, the question stops being, "What did she do?" and becomes, "Who are you?" And the crowd, to their credit, answers honestly. They leave. Oldest first, which John notes with what I've always suspected, is a trace of humor. The ones with the longest memories go first. Now the thing that gets missed, he does not say she didn't do it. He doesn't argue the facts, doesn't offer a defense, doesn't suggest the law is wrong. And at the end, alone with her, he says, "Go and sin no more," which is not the sentence of someone who thinks nothing happened. So this isn't a story about the irrelevance of wrongdoing. It's a story about who is qualified to execute judgment. And the answer is nobody present. And the application to your own situation is direct and unwelcome. You have a case. It may be entirely accurate. The facts may be exactly as you have assembled them, and the person may be exactly as guilty as you believe. The question this passage puts to you is not, is your case good? It's, are you the one to execute it? Because that's what unforgiveness is, functionally. It's the ongoing execution of a sentence, every cold response, every withheld warmth, every time you decline to extend what you would extend to anyone else. That's a stone thrown slowly over years, and the sentence that stops it is the same one that stopped the crowd. Not she was innocent, just who are you to be the one holding this? The stones in that story are dropped, not thrown. That's the image I'd leave you with. Nobody threw them. They put them down and they walked away. And there's no indication that any of them had changed their view of what she'd done. They'd only changed their view of their own standing to act on it. You don't have to decide the person was right. You only have to put the stone down. 49. Take up your cross and follow me. Near the end now, and this is the command that gathers all the others, because it names what forgiveness actually costs. Whoever wants to be my disciple must deny themselves and take up their cross and follow me. We've domesticated cross into a synonym for hardship, my difficult marriage, my back pain, my burdensome relative. That's not what it meant to people who had seen crucifixions on the roads outside their town. A man carrying a cross was a man walking to his own death in public, having already lost. So the command is, carry the instrument of your own death voluntarily in public. And here's how it connects to everything we've spent 3 hours on. Forgiveness is a death. That's why it's so hard, and why the language of letting go is so inadequate to it. Something genuinely dies when you forgive. Your right to the debt, the version of the story in which you are owed, the identity you've built, possibly over decades, as the person this was done to. That last one is the hardest, and almost nobody names it. Some of us have been wounded so long that the wound has become load-bearing. It explains things. It organizes the narrative of a life. It accounts for what didn't happen, what we didn't become, why things went the way they went. And forgiveness threatens all of that, because a forgiven injury can no longer do that work. Which means when you go to forgive and find something in you fighting it with unexpected ferocity, that's often what's fighting. Not stubbornness, not spiritual failure, self-preservation. Some part of you correctly understands that a version of you will not survive this, That part is right. It won't. Deny yourself. That's the clause before the cross. And it's precisely this, the setting aside of a self that has a legitimate claim, not pretending you have no claim, denying it, refusing to press something you genuinely hold, and then follow me. Which is the only reason any of this is bearable. The command isn't to die and stay dead. It's to walk a road behind someone who went the same way and came back, and whose entire testimony is that the thing on the other side of the cross was not the end. You don't forgive because the injury was small. You forgive because you've decided to follow someone who forgave from a cross, and because you have some reason to believe that road leads somewhere. 50. Follow me. 2 words. The first thing he ever said to anyone who became a disciple, and the last thing he says to Peter on a beach after everything has fallen apart and been repaired. And I want to end here because of what these 2 words do to the other 49. Because there's a way to hear a teaching like this one that produces nothing but exhaustion. 50 commands, 50 standards, 50 places you're failing. If you've been listening for 3 hours accumulating a list of your deficiencies, then something has gone wrong, and this final command is the correction. Follow me. Not achieve these. Not comply with this list. Follow, which is a verb about proximity and direction, not attainment. Look at how it's used. Simon and Andrew are working when he says it, and they don't first get their lives in order. Matthew is at a tax booth, actively engaged in the thing he'd need to repent of, and the command arrives mid-corruption. Peter has denied him 3 times, publicly at the worst possible moment, and the restoration on the beach ends with these same 2 words. Not try harder, not prove it. Follow me. Nobody in the Gospels is ever told to become qualified first, which means the 50 commands are not entry requirements. They're the description of what the road looks like as you walk it. They're what a person becomes in the company of Jesus over years. The thinking that gets reshaped, the speech that gets weighted, the forgiveness that becomes possible somewhere around year 6 when it wasn't in year 1. You are not being asked to arrive. You're being asked to walk. And if you take nothing else from these 3 hours, take this. The command is present tense, and it's available right now, in whatever condition you're in the room you're sitting in. Not after you've forgiven your father, not after you've fixed the thing about your speech that you recognized in part 2 and felt sick about. Now, as you are, follow me. That's the 50th command, and it's really the first one, and everything between them is just the road. So that's the 50, and I want to say something about what happens tomorrow because I've done enough of these to know the pattern. Right now, at the end of a long teaching, there's a clarity. Things feel possible. You can see the shape of a different way of living, and there's a resolve in you that feels durable. By Tuesday, it will be mostly gone. That's not a moral failing. That's how human beings work. Insight evaporates. It always has. What survives is what gets practiced. So I'd ask you to do one thing before you close this, and only one, because 10 will produce nothing, and 1 might produce something. Go back to whichever command made you most uncomfortable, not the most beautiful one, the one you wanted to skip. That discomfort is a location marker. It's telling you where the actual work is. And do one small thing with it this week. Send the message. Say the 4 syllables. Put down the stone. Speak the blessing you don't feel. 1 command. 1 week. That's how the 50 get into a life, not by admiration, but by the smallest possible act of obedience repeated until it stops feeling like an act. Before you go, if this teaching reached you tonight, would you send it to 1 person? Not to everyone. 1. And I suspect you already know who, because somewhere in these 3 hours a face came to mind. It probably came during the forgiveness section, though it might have been earlier. Someone carrying the exact weight we've been talking about. Someone who has been holding a file for 11 years and doesn't know there's a way to put it down. Someone who is in year 1 of something you're in year 20 of. Send it to them. Say nothing clever about it. No explanation, no message about how you thought of them. Just send it. Let the words do their own work, the way they did here. That's the whole ask, and it's a strange kind of gift because you'll probably never know whether it landed. You'll send it and hear nothing and wonder if it was foolish. That's fine. Most of the important things anyone does for anyone else are done without confirmation. And if you'd like to be here for what's next, subscribing is free. It's one tap, and it means the next teaching will find you rather than depending on chance. One more thing before the blessing. I'd like you to do something in the comments, and I want it to be honest rather than performative. Name one thing you are struggling to trust God with right now. Not the tidy version, the actual one, the situation you keep taking back after you've handed it over. You don't have to explain it or justify it. Just name it in whatever words are true. There is something that happens when a thing that has been carried silently gets written down where other people can see it, and I've watched it happen in these comment sections more times than I can count. And then read a few of the others. That's the part that matters. Someone is going to write the exact thing you thought only you were carrying. Now, the blessing. May the mind that has been running the same loop for years be given a different road to travel. May the sentence you have been rehearsing be replaced by one you have never said. May the name that has lived in you as a weight become, slowly and with difficulty, just a name. May you be released from the collection of a debt that will never be paid, and may you discover that the release was never a loss. And may the God who forgave from a cross, who went after the one who spoke over a woman with stones at her feet, may he meet you in the room where you are sitting tonight, exactly as you are, and say the only two words that were ever required. Follow me. Go in peace.